All right, everybody's ready to go? Just 12 hours between mommy and a margarita. Oh, you gotta be. Don't let a stuffy nose block your good time. Children's Afrin provides 12-hour all-day or all-night relief of nasal congestion from colds or allergies. Afrin, the wow is real. Use as directed.
MC Light here, and this time I'm using my voice to tell you about something I just started using. New Shea Moisture deodorants, created for rich melanin skin. Shea Moisture antiperspirant deodorants even skin tone and protect against sweat and odor for 48 hours. Shea Moisture whole body deodorants freshen all over all day with plant-based ingredients, no aluminum. Black dermatologists and gynecologists approved. I'm just saying, living in my rich melanin and protecting it too.
Hey people, this is Aram. I want to take a moment to thank you for listening to and sharing our first Dead Ghost production, Replay. We're busy planning out new productions and gearing up for Season 4 of our Dungeons & Dragons podcast, Kill Every Monster.
As you head into the central square, there is a enormous gathering of people here. Glass, obsidian, granite, wood, all crowded around this central plinth, this platform. On which a creature is delivering. It is proselytizing. A gigantic, round, bladed creature. One huge crater of an eye that seems to pull in wisps of matter. Its jaw unhinged. You see tentacles pouring out of its mouth, each ending in an eye of its own. Some of which you see run into the crowd around it, pouring like cables off the plinth and to the people, in the chests of the people in the crowd. And as it does, this flesh turns these people slightly in a vicinity around where these fleshy tentacles terminate in these people to flesh themselves partially. And it's like this connection is drawing a almost divine devotion from the people.
Okay, all right, so I look down and I just instinctively grab the front of my chest.
There are no strings on you.
When you reach out and you try to grab at it, you feel the little tremor that you've come to associate with walls cracking.
While recording Replay, Alex and I spoke to writer Kieron Gillen and artist Stephanie Hans to find out what went into making Die the role-playing game. You can watch a video of this interview at patreon.com/deadghostpro. We have both become rather obsessed with Die lately. Alex showed it to me like about a month ago, I want to say, maybe a little bit longer.
Month and a half, maybe.
Yeah. And I just like cleared my plate to make a show about it. We were playing a game literally just last night, and one of the people in it said that this game gives them everything Dungeons and Dragons doesn't. And that seemed like the perfect quote for me, because that's exactly what I feel like it does.
I did see it on Twitter. It's that kind of like, I'm abstractly, quote unquote, not on Twitter, even though I'm reading stuff. So I was trying to work out, it's always tricky because I don't want to respond, but at the same time, obviously I want to respond. That's very, both of you in terms of like, thank you for doing so much stuff about putting the game out there. And I'm glad it's working for you. You know, it's...
My plan is to single-handedly get all of Canada to have a copy of this game.
It's just so nice to not have to prep so much for these games. Like I still did more. Like I came into it with like, okay, we were part of a podcast, or at that time a radio show, because we had a radio at our high school, right? And I gave each person kind of a character going in, so it was a little bit more prep than usual. But for the most part, it's just easier to run because everyone's giving you so much. They're not looking at you like the arbiter of all the ideas. They're actually participating with you, and it feels equal, and we all feel driven towards a certain goal, as opposed to just like, I guess you met in a tavern, which is fine, but I guess you could do I guess you met in a tavern and die, but it would be a very dark tavern.
Sorry, generally thank you. But it's obviously there's so much like influences in terms of games I've sort of loved that have gone into Die as well. But like, yeah, it's it. I mean, like so much is like I'm an increasingly low prep person the more I've gone on. I remember like being a teenager, I played GURPS. Like GURPS is one of the games I played. And I was aware that I used all the rules in character creation, but when running, I barely used any of the rules. So it's one of those kind of awareness of like, oh yeah, it's fun. It's a kick to play with the rules, but it's not really serving what I like. So like Die was kind of built for that in terms of like it's got a ghost of like a classic RPG. Like you've got the stats and you got the roles, but in reality it's me stripped it back as much so I can just do what I like as a GM. So that kind of, and the other side of course is the whole Persona gem, which is about how people make plots. It's kind of like I was chatting to Alex Roberts when interviewing about Die, and then Alex said it's amazing. One of these core quotes in terms of society tends to make us think that creativity is something that is given to us, and that's part so they can sell it to you. The idea that you are not a creator; these are creators, and they will come down from the mountains and give you stuff. And RPGs are not. It's like got a small group of people around a table. We can make as many worlds as we want, and that's kind of like absolutely what I'm trying to make from Die. And Die is kind of how I do it. It's my this is how I wrote the comic. This is how you make messed up people. This is how you mess with them, and this is how you get a conclusion. So that's kind of the game. But so I'm glad it really works for you.
What was the first TTRPG you played?
MERPS, the Middle Earth role-playing game, which is like A, says my age, but B, I got it when I was 10. Have you played MERPS?
No, I haven't actually.
Oh, it's based on Rollmaster. So Rollmaster is one people's more like to. So Rollmaster is famous for all the tables.
Oh, no.
MERPS is Rollmaster cut down a bit. I mean, quite a bit, but cut down a lot. But for a 10-year-old, you're still getting tables with a. So I'm looking there going, like, I'm not sure about this. So it came with these little cutout cardboard figures. So me and my brother basically cut them out and pushed them on the map, and occasionally rolled the funny looking dice and looked up stuff on the tables, and had no idea. And of course, like over the next 4 or so years, we played MERPS quite a bit. But every time we learn a bit more and learn a bit more. But like after that, I played a lot of all the way from my teenage years. Is like bits of D&D, less D&D than most people. But like Warhammer and Cyberpunk and Paranoia, and like anytime I go home, there's a lot of stuff I had. Obviously, I mentioned GURPS as well. So yeah, that kind of coming from 85 to 97 was the time I was playing a lot of role-playing games as a younger person before coming back in when I was older.
Do you have a game that you tend to fall back onto as like a comfort game?
Not really, especially now. Like when I got back into this just isn't true. I keep saying back into. What I mean is like I went full into again. Like when I became quite conversant, it's like I was sort of heading towards Die. So I was thinking about Die as RPGs anyway. And I got together with a small group of my friends, and we wanted to basically play a lot of RPGs. And that kind of, let's see what's been going on. So it's like me, like Quentin Smith, if you know Shut Up and Sit Down, like he's a mate from back in the day, and he wants to have another quick. A friend of mine was a designer, and she's never played RPGs despite being a designer. My wife, who was RPG curious, thanks to like actually it was Harmontown, I think. That kind of, she's seen us do it, but that kind of RPGs had been demystified by actual play, and therefore actually I'll give it a shot. And another friend who wanted to have a nice time, so he played like every 1 to 4 sessions, so like quick, and that's what I kind of do. Like it's that kind of okay, what's going on here? So I'm more likely to play a new thing than play an old thing. But if you got me to sit down at a table, there's certain things I might just choose to run. Like actually I've run less so recently, but Dungeon World was something like there was a period my wife basically kind of rented me out to her cool fashionable poet friends to run games for them. That kind of like, they were RPG, you know what I mean? They were RPG curious. So I'll run. So Dungeon World has enough of D&D, because normally they mean, I kind of want to know what D&D works like. You know what I mean? Like they say I want to play an RPG, but what they really mean is they kind of want a taste of what mainstream RPG culture is, rather than, hey, let's play, I don't know, I've forgotten the name of any other game, like Wander Home or something like that. So D&D has enough of D&D to be...
What will appeal to a literary crowd that doesn't know anything about RPGs?
Yeah. But also kind of wants to know what a class... they want to have a fantasy... They want someone to throw a fireball. You know what I mean? Like, and there's other people I'll sit down and say, let's play, I don't know, Monster Hearts or something like that. Dungeon World became something I could just run off the box and run very quickly. Like I could run it any time people wanted. Also, the flip of that is it's also a thing I would want to run. Like in terms of classic D&D, which I've nothing but respect for. I'll very happily play in people's D&D game, but like I'm not going to go and stat block these monsters. There's absolutely no way.
I mean, I run a D&D show and I don't stat block the monsters. I have no idea how to balance that. I really don't even know how to balance my encounters. I just kind of go with what feels right and trust the people at my table. And then try not to kill them all,
It's hard. People die a lot. I mean, actually, part of designing die was like trying to make it it's quite a brutal system. It kills easily. A, killing isn't the end of the game, but B, combats are meant to be over quite quickly because it's about the human drama. And C, all the players have a way out, with possibly the exception of the dictator. But even they could use their brain. Like they don't have, like, a god binder. If it's really going badly, the god, okay, for God's sake, God, can you save our assets? I'll do something. And if, what I mean? Like, there's always a safety valve. So if it's too easy, you throw more monsters in. That's kind of my way of balancing on the fly. And it's like, I never make it explicit in the game, but kind of like, as somebody obviously has played a bunch of games, okay, what makes it safety rails, still.
We actually used one of those tools just the other day in our game for replay when the fool got themselves into a situation that they were not going to get out of, and they were able to hand over their die. And you saw how weighty it was. They had only played this game twice, but the decision to hand that die over, you caused the fool real pain. The character was not pleased about it, but loved the fact that there was a bailout there. And the fact that the fact that the game could grab people that easily, and the fact that the mechanics feel so unique to each character using dice that make it feel so familiar. How did you guys get to the idea that you wanted each die to be special and have powers?
That was absolutely one of those kind of core concept things. Like, after I had the core idea of die, which is like probably the story, more of the story than the game at that moment, when it was, did I lose part of myself in RPGs? What have I sacrificed to play games? That's kind of where die came from. It was, okay, now how do we do this? And part of it simply, one of the original ideas is the fetishization of 1980s, or rather, let me start that again. The fetishization of those core 1980s things that had the satanic panic. Because part of die is kind of like saying, oh, the satanic panic was right. Oh no, you should be scared.
Or at least they had a right to be worried,
yeah. Like, there's definitely like the fact we've sort of won that cultural war makes it kind of okay. Okay, I feel it's okay to take that iconography and have a game with it, or play with it a little. So it's like, and the dice are what take us to, the dice are what take us to other worlds. And that's not true. The human imagination of what takes us to other worlds. But in terms of like how you sort of talk about games, there's that power of the dice. So obviously the power comes from the dice. And the second you've got like, okay, there's 6 of them, I started mapping them. And especially die is a game where you basically start with one of the rings of power. That's the kind of vibe, as in, that's the reason why we don't have much magic items in the game per se. It's explicitly, you've already got them. If once Bilbo's got his ring, nothing else really matters because he's got the one ring. So that, and you start just building from there. Okay, how can we make this work? Which dice is most like this sort of class? Because I knew that at that point, it's like, okay, I want something that feels a bit like a paladin, or something that feels a bit like a cleric. And then it starting to cast them and thinking about, okay, how can you twist them? How I name checked Watchmen in the first episode of the comic, and explicitly, this is RPG Watchmen, and of course that's kind of what it is. What we always
Rorschach. Was it Rorschach?
Yes, but deconstructing the classes. So in other words, I stress this ain't nothing that people haven't done before. But like for me, it's okay. What is cleric? It's a bit weird. Clerics are like, I'll heal you, but only 1d8 in wounds. What God says? Okay, I'll heal 1d8 injury. This
is what I'm allotted.
Yeah, it's really strange. So that's kind of where the Godbinder comes from, where somebody explicitly trying to not do that.
By taking the core D&D polyhedral dice that everyone knows, right? You have kind of locked yourself into a game master and 5 players, which is different from the normal table of 4. Did you guys think about that when you were doing it, or did it just feel good to have that extra player?
It emerges from the story for me. It's that kind of like, the second you've realized it's going to be the dice, and you want the GM as a class, because we're kind of playing games of that idea of GM as antagonist, which is never true. You know, it was never okay. It's not quite true. It was occasionally was true, but like it was never true in a good way. No good game has ever been played from the GM as I've said that, so my brain immediately goes, there's probably an exception to that. I always look for the exception, but in reality, like if the GM thinks they're trying to kill you in a way which isn't like somehow playful, that's not a recipe for play. So once you've reached that kind of stuff, it follows as 5. But of course, Die is also a game which is like it's from the narrative RPG tradition as well. You've got the whole Persona side, which is much softer, much more like question and answer based, and most of those games play with less players. So you know you're playing with. I mean, when I'm running Die and I'm running for people, I'm more likely to run for 3 players than 5 players. You know, so you get more focus time. You get so in some ways having 5 maximum is definitely a prod towards we want you to be playing with a smaller group. Like, or other, we think it will probably be easier for you as a GM, and also better for you as players to play with smaller groups. So it's definitely part of that design, and also like the fact you're ideally saying 3 or 4 players to begin with, or 3. That means you can drop classes. You know, that's the other side of it as well.
One of the safety tools being like, do we want a dictator in the game is kind of hard to have if then you have 5 players and one of them has to be the dictator if you go rules as written. Obviously, though, Kieron, you've run games of Die infamously with 7 players.
Not willingly.
Not willingly, yes, not willingly. That is a good point.
The number of players will decide what kind of game it is. So if you've got that number of players, it's probably going to be a bit more procedural. You know, it's going to be a bit close to D&D. But like I say, that it's not always true. That's one thing I was running like Gen Con. Since I haven't ran for a few months, I was more aware of what I was doing as a GM. You know, as in, I'm doing it. You know, rather than being instinctive, it's kind of like, it's interesting. I see what you're doing here, Kieron. And it's stuff like that initial combat against the Fallen, which most games start with, which is essentially a tutorial. And I run it as, here's a chance for each player to have spotlight time. You get your magic girl transformation. You get to use your cool powers at least once. I am now teaching each player, and here, okay, you're going to do a dice roll, and then eventually you introduce the first attack is probably on the Fallen, so there's no difficulty. So you don't even explain what difficulty is. And eventually, like, someone will attack an emotion knight, and then it's like, now I'm going to explain what difficulty is. It's that kind of thing. So that the rule's all there, but I'm aware that after every single action in that first combat, I'm asking the player, how did that feel? Okay, you've just thrown a fireball. Let's take a pause. Let's talk about what the fuck a fireball feels like. You say your girlfriend or boyfriend's in the group. Okay, you've just seen your other half murder this person. Does this change the way you feel about them? And so that's one reason why I'm running combat rarely lasts more than 2 or 3 rounds, or 3. That's kind of the vibe, and that's because I'm spending as much time almost asking questions to remind people about what's happening as much as the action. And of course, it's not always as intense in the once you go past that first combat. But I was aware that explicitly there's a real reason why I want it low weight, because you want to be able to roll fiction world, then players' personas to ground it. And that's absolutely what we do in Die.
Yeah, it seems to be a game that's made to wound the feelings. And boy, does it do a good job at that. It takes really good aim at the feelings.
That's why I play anyway, the humanity of it.
You mentioned about the fact that this game is about why we play games. Part of the reason why I put our show at a radio station is because I make a lot of TTRPG shows. And so I wanted to ask why we play these games, and also why we record these games, and why we share these games. And this just seemed the perfect avenue for that. And it just opens up these conversational pools.
There's a variety of questions inside questions there, which I'm going to highlight something really cool that you did. As in, by setting it at the radio station, it's obviously increasing the meta in a different way. But one of the real moves the GM can do, because early on in Die, we didn't have a set scenario. Rituals wasn't the way you went to play. We had basically the GM after the first session went away and went, what on earth am I going to do? Like, I've got no idea where I'm going to put them. So you looked at the character's background to see what kind of world you could put them in. And eventually I got to a session which was the player. I don't want to use a boring, but it was really kind of not big answers. They were kind of like no big ideas. Like, if I was doing a band, like all the players were bands, I said at a music festival that where they were going when they had a fatal car crash that killed their drummer. That kind of, and that's they are big hooks. But this group were a bit boring in that answers. So I was like, what the hell can I do? I'll drop them in the RPG world, obviously, because then I realized, oh, I said that works for everybody. Anybody who's played RPGs, and that was me. Oh no, that's now the default game. But now, so in other words, by choosing a bit of the fiction, it narrows the possibilities and allows the GM, you get a more predictable story, but even whilst being very open. Instead of having an infinite white paper, you've got a white paper like that sized. Now, what of course you've done is you've said, okay, we're doing this, and that's you know what I mean. And then they can, and that makes it easy for the players as well. Like, because in early playtests of Die, it was like, I kind of opened it with like, okay, how do we know each other? Like, that's impossibly big, and you can still run Die like that, but you get a real kind of power by saying, hey, we're this or we're that. Oh, okay, we're people in an old people's hole. We're soldiers sit halfway up a mountain somewhere. And immediately we're going to tell a story about these kind of people. And to us, a lot of it, you mentioned like answering questions and the power of that. So much is just from the really cool indie. I mentioned like Monster Hearts, which is like, who do you sit next to in class? What's the reason this person is like not speaking to this other person? And that just it distributes it. B, it makes everyone buy in. Like immediately it's like, I'm invested in this world because I've just made up this weird dumb river where the elves live. So the funny thing about Die as a minor thing, it also takes the pressure off being a good answer. Because it's like, in the standard game this is the fantasy world you played as teenagers. So in other words, it's not necessarily going to make any sense. It's relatively, like it's allowed to be bad because you're a group of teenagers who don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. In fact, it's fun when it's bad. They can be, oh God, our GM is such a hack, and it actually becomes part of it. That is a lot of fun. And it does, you're right, because the game can get so very serious and so very dark, but you have these methods like the fact that things can be silly for no reason, inexplicably silly, to take the pressure off and to refocus the story for a bit so it doesn't feel so dark and dire. And also so there's a bit of gallows humor once in a while. I noticed that a lot in the comic book. It would shift from very dark tones. I can think specifically there was the whole trench warfare, with the dragons and everything, and it just felt oppressive and heavy, just like trench warfare should. Were you ever concerned that you might be making the game, or at least potential games out of it, too dark?
A little bit. I mean, like, actually, joking aside, the real answer is probably not. Like, because it's like players always goof around. I mean, for me, it was like very much like the idea there's a flexibility there in terms of like, if you play Die as Jumanji, just literally your group of people transformed, you go on a silly adventure, you kill the guy who dragged you there, go home. You play that's still a great story. I mean, like and if the group wants that, that's not a problem. That's a really fun way to do it. Conversely, I know there's people who play Die much harder than I do. Like, that's the weird thing about the idea that you're not quote unquote best at the game. Like, there's definitely groups who've gone incredibly, and the players have given so much to it. And if I run Get Die, I'm like, obviously I've run Die a lot, surprising no one. But like, I go between the tones. Like there's the kind of the real heartbreak, and then suddenly you've got Taylor Swift as a god giving you missions. Like, yeah. or you got sound. And for me, those kind of tonal mess is what I do. Wicked Divine is fundamentally a very playful comic, at the same time is like a brutal, tragic comic, and that's my aesthetic. So in other words, there's a lot about. I mean, I always use when I'm sort of talking about RPGs, I regularly use the metaphor as bands, as in the group. Each group is a band, and it's not like it's good or bad. I mean, people sort of, are you a good GM or a bad GM? Like, if everyone else wants to play, I don't know, a hardcore rave band, and you want to play soft jazz, that's not going to work. And that's not a problem of soft jazz or hardcore rave. That's the problem is you're playing different music, guys. That is like, and there's a lot about, for me, in like into the rituals which we wrote into the game and everything else. There's a lot about trying to make sure everyone's on the same page. We're going to be doing this.
See, now that got my gears turning into thinking, what about a GM who wanted to play jazz, but everyone else was really into raving? How is that world? How is that story going to go along? And how are the ravers going to mess up the jazz concert that the GM has set up for everyone? And is the saxophone a fallen?
Always.
Stephanie talked about, I asked her what her one great contribution to the book was, what she thought it was. And she said the unfolded Die 20 design, that was hers and she loved it. Can you talk a little bit about that since we didn't get that on mic?
Yeah, this is one of the bits. Like, obviously, we've got Ryan Hughes as our designer in the comic. Ryan Hughes, the classic modernist comic design. And he's not just a comic designer, but he's like, especially in comics, he's very incredibly well thought of. He does these really smart and very clever pieces of work, and he knows everything. And when I was chatting to him early on, it was like, we want to make feel it's an RPG comic, and we want to use the iconography of RPG comics, but we don't want to be your classic stick a D20 on it, like, you know, that kind of stuff. We wanted it to feel new, because RPGs are new. I mean, despite being 50 years old, they're still like a new form, and cool, because they are. But when Stephanie was doing the cover before this, she came up with the idea of having the exploded D20 on the cover, and it's like, it's an amazing idea, but the weird thing about it is it's not a Stephanie idea. Stephanie is not rigorous, and by which I mean she's not like someone who thinks in lines. I always describe her as the ocean. She's powerful and like passionate and romantic, and you see how she approaches the page compared with Jamie, the artist on Wictive. Like, she's all about like not having strict rules. She'll play and explore and see what's going on there. And the idea she came up with, this kind of austere piece of modernist poetry, is like whatever. So obviously, Ryan took it and ran with it, and suddenly that's the icon. You know, that's the icon of the whole series. But yeah, it's absolutely, in terms of the single biggest impact, is all those lines. It's pretty astounding.
No, it's going to sound silly to ask you, the writer and co-creator of the entire world of it, but what would you say is your one? Like, if you could distill it down to the one great contribution, what would it be?
Oh God, I suppose actually the RPG. I mean, like, the RPG is the thing that separates Die from any other comic, as in the idea of, I'm going to write 300,000 words for no reason. Like, and part of Die was like me thinking, what do other people don't do? You know what I mean? It's ludicrous. Like, obviously people do RPGs of games, and RPGs of comics, but Die is like not a hack of another system. It's something built from scratch, which is foolish. There's no way I should have done that. It's an act of arrogance to even try it. And even though I approached the whole thing with as much humbleness as I can, which isn't much because I'm a monster. But I work with the best people, and I spend a lot of time trying to get stuff working, etc., etc., etc. So the idea of actually, we could do an RPG at the same time, because doing the RPG shed light on the comic and vice versa so much. So both are better for the existence of the other one. Like, as I've said this before many times, I don't know which is the primary work. They're both first, as much as I'm concerned.
Stephanie had like a reading order. Like, she really recommends reading the comic before getting into the game, just for some additional buy-in, understanding some of the mechanics from a narrative perspective before you understand the mechanics from a crunchy perspective. But when I pitch it to my players and when I pitch it to readers, it's very much the same of the comic and the game are in conversation with each other. The game narratively cannot exist without the narrative happening in the comic, but it's not that one is a prequel and one is a sequel. It's just there is a conversation happening between them, and neither is going to spoil your enjoyment of the other. Like, there are additional elements that you get from each, but they're not going to spoil your enjoyment or ruin the ways or tell you how to play a specific thing. And what I found over and over again is that players who haven't read the comic tend to fall into creating personas that follow the same trajectory as the characters in the comic. You always have the dictator who's a failed artist. You always have the emotion knight who has a very weird relationship with the dictator and with everyone else in the group. You always have the Neo who is just like, I'm here.
The pathways for characters to take are delineated by those mechanical choices. So if you give the dictator as an artist, in the game they're defined as there's someone who basically creates awful, what is an artist but somebody who controls someone else's emotions. And I'd sort of say, let's take that and make it creepy. So failed artists or like frustrated artists is very much in the mix there. But there's various approaches which are central casting, in that kind of like the classic master character is somebody who's completely messed up their entire life, and now as a cry for help they're doing this. The cry for help nature of the master is completely something that turns up again and again and again. But there's definitely kind of like, the Fool. I'm sort of pausing it. Like, the Fool is, of course, falls into sort of kinds of behavior, but what I find interesting is definitely the slight variations on it. Like, the long campaign I played of Die, which is the Fool as just a sweetheart. Like, Chuck in the comics a monster, but our Fool was just somebody who couldn't bear the idea of hurting anybody, or like and that's absolutely also. And he was a fool for love. He did all manner of like awful dumb stuff, and it was always kind of like that. But he was the bunny rabbit. He was the cinnamon roll. but it was still nonetheless foolish. And at the same time, there's also, I always think about it as casting against type. Like dictator is the flip of it. So the dictator, we talk about the artist, the controlling person, or we could easily give the dictator to somebody who has no control in their real life. And it becomes the power fantasy. Now I'm in charge. And that's a very different kind of story. So in other words, you have these kind of big defined sort of ways the stories can go, and there's ways but they're not quite just one. Even though, if you're running a long DAO campaign, the number of people who are failed writers or want to be writers or have turned their teenage game into a fantasy, a career, they are common. And also for a good reason, because they're really useful characters. Because anyone who's got a really powerful internal fantasy life in DAO is golden. You can go a long way with that.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us for the launch of Dead Ghost Productions. We are a queer-run and owned studio and a proud member of the Realm Network.
Keep up to date with Replay and all of our projects by following us on Twitter @DeadGhostPro. Find all of our social media and all the shows we produce at deadghostpro.com.
Contained herein are the heresies of Radolf Burntwine, erstwhile monk turned traveling medical investigator. Join me as I uncover the blasphemous truth of a plague-ridden world, that ours is not a loving God, and we are not its favored children. The heresies of Radolf Burntwine, coming January 2nd, wherever podcasts are available.
This show was produced and edited by Dead Ghost Productions. Find out more about us and all the shows we make at deadghostpro.com.